Hey Aurora, it's Mr. Bloom here. Welcome back from spring break. I hope you're doing well. I think most importantly, I hope you and your family are healthy and everything is going all right in these interesting times. I hope you also enjoyed your spring break. I'm sure it was probably a little different than your normal spring breaks, but I hope you made the best of it and at least got to do some things that you want to do and relax for a little bit. Anyway, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, which was the Earth's atmosphere. So, one thing we need to do today, the other science teachers and I thought it'd be a good thing to kind of give you a summary of some of the important aspects or features of the atmosphere. So, what we have attached to Google Classroom that I'm going to go over now is this Earth's atmosphere summary page. So you have this attached to Google Classroom. Now I'm going to go over it bullet point by bullet point. If you want to, go over it on your own as well, that's an option you can take. But at the end of this video, there's going to be some instructions for today. So you might want to kind of check out the end of the video if you go over these on your own to kind of see what you need to do. So first of all, we have to remember bullet point number one, that the atmosphere is the bubble of gases that surround the planet. You can think of it as a bubble, a blanket, a covering, but it's around our planet Earth. And basically, when we leave the atmosphere, outer space officially begins. So you got to think of it as my hands are showing here. It's kind of like this bubble around the Earth that is very important. So this bubble for bullet point number two is made up of a mixture of gases. The most prevalent gas, the most abundant gas is nitrogen, that's 78%. And then we have oxygen at 21%. The remaining 1% or so is a bunch of other gases, including argon, which is number three, and carbon dioxide being number four. So, again, nitrogen and oxygen are the main two of the gases that make up the atmosphere. And of course, all these gases are invisible, but they are there taking up space and they're a very important component of the atmosphere. Moving down here, bullet point number three tells us why the atmosphere is so important. Well, number one, it has the oxygen that we need to breathe. So that's very important. Number two, it keeps our planet at a livable, warm temperature. If not, the Earth would be way too cold if the atmosphere wasn't there. And the last two things are it protects us from space rock, also known as meteors or shooting stars. And it also protects us from the sun's harmful UV ultraviolet rays. That's what the ozone layer does, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Moving along. Now, the atmosphere is broken up into five main layers. We can make a connection to the inside of the Earth that we did in geology, which had four main layers. Remember the crust, mantle, outer, and inner core? Well, the atmosphere, we're going the other way. We're going out towards space, has five layers. So we have the troposphere, which is kind of ground level where we are. And then as we go up, we have the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, and the exosphere. So if I bring up this little visual here, and you can see at the right of my screen, kind of down here at the bottom, I could probably actually even zoom in a little here. I mean, that's better. The lower level is the troposphere. That's where my mouse pointer is. That's where we live. Moving up is the stratosphere. Then we have the mesosphere. And then we jump up to the thermosphere. And way, way up before we get to outer space, we have the exosphere. Now, these are the five main layers, but we also have, if you look on the side here, this thing called the ionosphere, which is kind of a part of three layers. Okay, it's not just in one layer, it's part of three. And we also have the ozone layer, which is part of the stratosphere. So we have the five main layers, and we also have two other areas of the atmosphere for the parts. Moving along, if we start to look at the parts now, this next bullet point is talking about the troposphere, and that's where we live, where weather happens. Clouds are located there. And also, if you've taken an airplane or a helicopter ride, that was most likely in the troposphere as well. That's the lowest ground level that we're most familiar with. If we move up, the stratosphere is the next layer. And this is most important for the ozone layer. That's that layer that's found inside the stratosphere that protects us from the sun's UV or ultraviolet rays, kind of bounces them off and puts them back into space. So without that, I mean, Earth would be a much different place. So it would be very dangerous for us to live. If we continue going up, the mesosphere is the next layer. That's the third. And that is the coldest of the layers. The temperature will reach the lowest there. And that's also where meteors or space rock burn up. Now you have to think, we have rock that flies in from outer space that enters our atmosphere. And when it enters our atmosphere, it's kind of like if you watch me, I'm rubbing my hands together here. When you rub your hands together, it creates heat or friction. And the faster you go, the more heat or friction you'll get. Well, if you can imagine a space rock flying in and rubbing against the gases of the atmosphere, well, it rubs really fast and makes a lot of friction and actually burns that rock up as it's flying through the atmosphere. And we see it as a streak of light called the shooting star. And most times it burns up to basically dust before it hits the earth. And that's good because we don't want these rocks hitting Earth, and luckily the atmosphere burns them up in the mesosphere. Now, the moon, on the other hand, has a very limited atmosphere. So basically, those space rocks come right in, no atmosphere, and bam, hits the moon, which is why it has so many craters. Moving on up, we got the thermosphere. That's the fourth layer. And the word thermosphere, you have that word thermos inside of it. Good word study here. Thermosphere contains thermos, and a thermos keeps heat in. So the thermosphere is the hottest layer of the atmosphere. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's hot. It just means it's the highest in temperature out of all the five. So this is where our satellites are, or at least some of them, and that thing called the International Space Station. Now, I didn't even realize that. I thought these things were in outer space until I started learning about the atmosphere. But actually, satellites in the ISS, they're located in the atmosphere. They're not even in outer space. So they're in our atmosphere still. And the fifth layer, final layer, is the exosphere. We also have some satellites in this layer. And after we kind of get out of the exosphere, you're officially in outer space. There's really kind of no ending official point of the exosphere, but eventually, after you get so high up into it, you're technically in outer space. So those are the five main layers. Now, let's not forget, we talked about that ionosphere early on. That's a layer that's within multiple layers. And it's important because we're the aurora unit. And in the ionosphere, we have something called the aurora borealis, or the northern lights. If you want to see what those are or what they look like, Google it. But they're beautiful, colorful lights that appear in the sky in certain areas on Earth. And they're taking place in the ionosphere. So again, that's the aurora borealis, or northern lights. The ionosphere is responsible for them. And lastly, the higher up in the atmosphere we go, basically gases get thinner. They're more spread out. And also pressure decreases. You have to think we're at the bottom. So at the bottom of anything, if it's a pile, like my hands are showing a pile going up, the bottom of the pile's got everything else on top of it. So there's a lot of pressure pushing down on it. So the bottom of the atmosphere has all the gas squeezed together tight, and there's a lot of pressure. Once you get higher up, it kind of spreads out more, and there's less pressure, and it's more spread out. So down at the bottom, it's very pressurized and tight, high density. Up higher, it spreads out, and less density the higher up you go. So it's you often hear people say the higher up, increased altitude, it's harder to breathe. That's because the oxygen's so spread out the higher up you go. So that is the atmosphere summary. This is also attached to Google Classroom. Now for today, one thing you're going to have to do is attach to Google Classroom is a Kahoot. There's no time on it. I want you to go through it. There's 20 questions all about the atmosphere. Please do not guess. Okay, you have this resource to use, or use any of the other resources that you might have from previous days, and make a good decision before you select the answer. I want to see really high scores on this. I know you can do it. So it's not a competition, it's just practice for you. So that's one thing you need to do. Again, use your real name so I know that you gave it an attempt. The second thing you're going to need to do is a BrainPop assignment. Now remember, BrainPop is on your BrainPop account. Okay, so I put the link to BrainPop on Google Classroom. However, when you get onto BrainPop, you have to sign in like you're signing into Google with your school email and password. When you get on BrainPop, watch the video. It's only a few minutes long. Take the quiz. I actually made this quiz myself. It's not the BrainPop quiz. I made it on my own. So you should be very successful with it. And then there is the challenge. The challenge is optional, but I highly, highly, highly encourage that you give it a try, especially if you have time on your hands today. Why not give it a try? All right, so everything you need pretty much is linked to Google Classroom. I'm expecting your best work today. If you don't get everything done today, that's okay. You can take it into tomorrow and get some stuff done tomorrow as well. There's no rush. And if you have any questions, concerns, of course, after you've read the instructions and used all of your resources, please reach out to me. And just do your best. And if there's anything I can help you with at all, please just reach out. All the teachers are available to you. And I hope you have a great day. And tomorrow and Wednesday, we have some activities from Miss Barrio and Miss Annuario with the atmosphere as well. And then we'll continue moving on with the weather.